So you want a bottle, right? Well, there's a few things you have to think about before you bottle your brew. And that is, what kind of bottle do I want to put it in? I tend to like, for still meads that are not going to be carbonated, these little screw cap bottles. They're reusable. So the second I'm done with my mead, I can wash both the cap and the bottle, and I'm good to go for the next batch, as long as you sanitize them in between uses. Do you have any bottles of empty liquor or beer or anything like that? As long as it had a cap, perfectly good. Sanitize it, and this bottle is great to store your brew. And then you have these swing caps. Now, swing caps are great for carbonated beverages, such as beer or sparkling wines. Really depends on what you want to do. Now, you can buy a capper or a corker, and cork bottles and cap beer bottles, and you can store stuff that way. That is actually a great way to do it, but it involves extra equipment, and then caps and corks that will have to be replaced every single time you open a bottle, which is a lot of extra work, and I don't have space right now for all the extra equipment, so I just kind of stick to what I know. Now that we ran through which bottles you have access to, and again, your comfort level. I'm never going to say, don't buy a cork or don't buy corks, just do it. No, absolutely not. If you're comfortable with the equipment you have and you want to do it that way, that's a fantastic way to store a bottle, and it's a very presentable way to gift a bottle. So I'm totally down for it. I'm just not personally going to do it. So now you want to take your brew. What brew is it? It doesn't matter. This is just a brew that I have that needs to be bottled. So first thing I'm going to do is remove the bung and airlock, which I hope you were using. Give me 1 second. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is take a reading. I want to see where this brew is at. Now, this brew has been aging for a few months, so I'm positive it's done, but I still want to know. Also, if you notice by the fermenter itself, I don't have a whole lot of notes written about this one. I just know it was a tea mead that I made a while ago. And what I'm really curious about is it dry? Which, since it's not floating yet, I'm going to assume, yeah, it's dry. And it is exactly 1.000. So it's dry, so we're good. Next thing I want to do is add it to a pitcher, slowly and carefully. Try to pour it down the side. You don't want to oxidize this brew, or any brew. Now, I always recommend racking into a pitcher before you put it into bottles. It gives you a little bit more control over their situation, and it lets you know if there's anything else you need to add. Also, I'll just say, when I picked up that fermenter, the light caught it a certain way. It is crystal clear. It's just a very dark brew, which when you make a mead and you use a lot of tea in it, or flavored tea, that tends to happen. Now, this is an auto siphon. It's a few different parts. It's a racking cane. It has this little stopper on the bottom that actually lets you control flow and how much lees you're going to get into your actual brew. In this case, we want as little as possible. It's going into bottles today. It's not going to have a lot of time for stuff to settle back out, and that's fun. It actually smells really good. I'm going to put one end into the pitcher, and I'm going to put the other end into the brew, about halfway down just to start it. After a few good pumps, it should start. I think the seal on my auto siphon's going a little bit, so it's taking a little bit more for mine. And then I gently just lower it until it hits the bottom. And I try to be as gentle and careful as possible. This will only work if you elevate the source. Because it's a gravity feed, this has to be higher than this. If the liquids meet, it will stop flowing. Now, when you get to a certain point, you're going to want to tip your fermenter towards where your autosiphon is gently. And that's just going to raise the volume of liquid. Because of that cap, you are going to lose a little bit more. So you want to try to get as much as possible. Now, if you kick up sediment and you kick up yeast and it starts to get sucked in, you might have to stop it a little earlier. But this yeast cake on this one seems to be very well compacted. And I think I'm going to get a good amount of product out of this bottom part. And now we had to cut it off. But we're good. Now when you remove your wand, you want to be mindful. There's still going to be liquid in the hose and in the bottom. When you start to lift it, it'll start to naturally drain itself. And then I just like to tip it back in and let any of that mead just spill back into the thing. You could try to save it. What I really don't want to do is drip it all over myself and my equipment and that kind of stuff. So now we're good with the autosiphon for a few minutes. And if you look at the bottom of the fermenter, there's a little bit of, I would call it muck, but it's really just the leftover sediment from the brew and then the yeast colony and anything that settled out during clarification in secondary. You're always going to lose just a little bit. My recommendation is don't worry about it. You can sit here and stress for hours. You can let it clear again. You can put it into a smaller jar, let more of it sit up. Like, you could really go the extra mile, but at the end of the day, it's a couple tablespoons of mead, and I'd much more rather you guys focus on the bigger picture. Get it? No, I'm corny. Okay, so now that it's in the pitcher, there's a few things you want to think about, but you can't do much of it without first sampling your brew. After all, you brewed it, you put all the time and effort into it, you should be allowed to taste it. Take a note of the color. It's like this beautiful amber color. When you swirl it, you can see what they call the legs of the brew. It generally is a descriptor for how thick the brew is. In this case, it has a nice thickness. I'd call it maybe a medium or so. The whiff on this one, the aroma is incredible. I used a chai tea blend for this one, and man, it's almost like a metheglin. Just it's that close. And yeah, it tastes like a really nice spiced mead, which I believe was my intention. But here's what you want to be looking for no matter what you are brewing. How's the acidity? Does it need any acidity? Is it bright enough when you drink it? Is it thick enough? Do you want to add wine tannin at this point to give it a little more body? Is it sweet enough? That's probably the biggest question you have to ask. Is it sweet enough? And that really depends on your preference of what you're drinking. Some people really like very sweet wines and meads. Some people like them on the drier side. And then there's a whole bell curve of in between. Maybe I like it semi-sweet. Maybe I want it just a tad sweeter than it is. At this point, you could add a non-fermentable sugar, such as erythritol, to your mead, and it would sweeten it, and it would bring out more of that honey characteristic if that's what you're looking for. You should not add at this point a fermentable sugar, such as honey, regular table sugar, maple syrup, anything of that nature, and then bottle it. You'd be essentially creating bottle bombs, and they're going to be a time bomb that you don't have a timer for, which would mean at some point it's going to just shatter because the pressure in the bottle is going to get so much that the bottle can't contain it anymore. This is yeast. The yeasts are done for now, but they're still in the brew. And if you add fermentable sugar to it at this stage without pasteurizing, you have a problem. Now, if you want to add honey, maple syrup, table sugar to this, you can bottle, but you'd have to pasteurize those bottles or use a chemical stabilizer that would naturally kill the yeast off. But if you're not going to do those today, then just use erythritol if you want to sweeten, or any other non-fermentable sugar. There is a ton on the market. They have different sweetness levels, and you'd have to play around with it and find out. Basically, you would add a little bit to it, stir it up, try it. Is it sweet enough now? Okay, good. Is it not? Add a little bit more, stir it up again. That's the mix and match. Now, if you want to carbonate this brew, you can use a carbonation calculator or add about a tablespoon to a gallon, I think is the standard. I don't carbonate a whole lot, so don't quote me on that. But there are definitely brew calculators online that will tell you, depending on your volume, how much sugar to add. It'd be a minuscule amount that you would then distribute through the whole brew, put into a swing top bottle or a corked bottle, something that is made to stand with carbonation, and then give it a few weeks, and it will naturally carbonate and give you a fizzy beverage. That is fantastic, and it is something you can do. You can also buy, I believe they are little tablets of sugar that would go in each bottle, and that would also work to naturally carbonate your brew. If you keg it, you can use CO2 cartridges. There's a ton of ways to make a carbonated beverage. That's not my intention for this beverage, so I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to bottle it still and let it just sit still in the bottles, and that's how I'm going to drink and enjoy it. We can do a video on carbonation, and if you want to see one, please leave it in the description. I'd be happy to make a carbonation video and show you a natural, safe way to carbonate. I'm just giving the warning that if you put a fermentable sugar in here right now, it's going to kick up a fermentation again, quite possibly. Some cases it might not, but there's very few ways to control that unless you stabilize or pasteurize. I know I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but I think it's really important you understand that before you bottle your brew. You want it to be done with fermentation so that nothing else is going to happen to it. And then, yeah, that's about it. Once it's done, it's done. This is not going to ferment again because there's no more sugars for it to ferment. If you add sugar, it's going to ferment. So now my next step is going to be raise the pitcher again. And now I have this little bottling cap or a bottling wand. It goes on the end of my auto siphon. And you want to make sure it's on tight enough that it's not going to fall off while bottling. But you want to make sure that it's not on so tight that the little spring thing doesn't click. Essentially, it's really cool. When it's pressed into a bottle, the mead will flow. When you pick it up, the mead will stop. It's a great way to waste less mead than if you just tried to rack bottle by bottle without that cap. Can you do it? Yeah. Is it going to be a little bit more annoying? Yeah. Before I start racking this time, I am going to take this little cap off. This will allow this to just flow directly from the bottom. And I'm going to get every drop of mead from here into bottles. You can keep the cap on if you really want, but it's not going to be doing much of a purpose since this is already racked once and in a separate container. One side goes in here, all the way to the bottom this time. The other one goes in here. Now you need to keep at least one hand on this to make sure that it's pressed in. If it's not, this has nowhere to flow and you're going to shoot the cap of it across your room or like something else very similar to that. It just won't work as well. So give it a few pumps, let it start. Maybe one more. And now you'll see it starts to come up. As long as this is pressed in, it will keep flowing. If I want to stop for any reason, I have to scratch my nose, I have to run across the room, someone's calling my phone, you can just pick it up, it will stop flowing. And the second you press it back down, it will instantly start again. Now, of course, just like before, these bottles were sanitized. You can reuse them as many times as you want, just make sure you clean them out well after use, and then sanitize them before you start to put a new beverage into it. This will keep for years in the bottle just like this. They're shelf stable. You can keep them out. I usually keep them in a cardboard box tucked away, but I also have boxes and boxes of meat at this point for making videos and other little projects. You can even keep them in the fridge if you want to enjoy it cold. I like to try them room temperature first, and then sometimes I will chill them, but most of the time I don't. But your mileage may vary. Now you might be thinking, when are you going to stop? And that's the question. You really want to let it go as long as possible. And now you can stop it at that point because there's still space in the bottle that the wand was taking up. So by letting it get to the very, very cap, the very top, and then pulling it out, you give each bottle the same amount of headroom, and it's a minuscule amount of headroom. It's a safe amount for the bottles. I like to put a cap on as soon as it's bottled, put it to the side, get the next bottle out that you're going to need, and basically it's just wash, rinse, and repeat until you're done with all the bottles. All right. So now, as long as you keep it pressed in, you should be able to get pretty much every drop out of the wand. There might be a few drops left in, but you can just put that in your glass at that point. So I know that wasn't a full gallon of product that I racked, but you'll see I got 3 full bottles and then 1 partial bottle out of that. These 3 bottles are now shelf stable, perfectly safe to store, and you can put them, as I said, either in a box somewhere, in a cabinet somewhere. You want to keep them out of direct sunlight is really the only caveat to it. But like this, they will stay great for years, and they'll only improve with age. So you let one of these sit for a year and try it, you're going to have a whole different mead than you have right now, which I've been trying to do a little bit more just to see the different nuances in it a year from when I made it. This one, however, different story. Unfortunately, it just was not enough product to make that last bottle full, so that's a little bit too much headroom, and this has the potential to oxidize over time, which would ruin the brew. Now, there are some things that taste better oxidized, but for the most part, it's just something you want to avoid. It's not going to be the intended taste for your mead, and if the ABV was too low, acetobacters that would convert alcohol to vinegar, and you end up making a mead vinegar, which isn't a bad thing. It's a thing you can use in your kitchen, but again, it wasn't your intended product. These are at least 13% ABV, so I'm not worried about vinegar happening, but I am worried about oxidization happening and changing the brew. So this one will go in my refrigerator, and I'm probably going to drink it first. Within the next few days, you should be fine. I hope that answered any questions you have about racking into bottles and bottle conditioning and all that other fun stuff. If you liked today's video, please go ahead and hit that like button. Let me know. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about today's video, please leave a comment in the description. I'd be happy to answer anything else you have. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit subscribe. It's the only way you can really be guaranteed to see when my new videos come out, or check out all my other videos that I have posted in different playlists. But guys, that's all I have for today. So until next time, I am Phil. This is Phil with Facts,